Imagine waking up one morning and finding the doors of one of the most powerful royal residences in the world quietly, legally and permanently sealed against you. Not by a king, not by a court ruling, but by the calculated move of one royal lawyer acting on behalf of one extremely determined princess. That is exactly what reportedly happened inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, and the woman behind the move is not who most people would expect. Princess and the Princess Royal, the hardest working, least celebrated and arguably the most underestimated member of the entire British royal family, the woman who for decades has stood in the background, never seeking the spotlight, always doing her duty quietly and without complaint. But behind palace walls something changed. Something that forced the daughter of the late Queen Elizabeth II to reach a point where silence was no longer enough, where duty alone could not protect what she believed needed to be protected, so she did something extraordinary. She called her lawyers. And what followed sent a ripple of shock through every inner circle of the British monarchy, because the person reportedly blocked from her planned private summer stay at Buckingham Palace was none other than Queen Consort Camilla, the woman who sits beside King Charles III on the throne of Great Britain. This was not just about a summer holiday, this was not just about rooms or schedules. This decision sent a clear message, one that every senior royal, every courtier and every palace insider understood immediately. The question is, what was that message and why did it come from Princess Anne? Let's start from the beginning. To most of the outside world, Princess Anne and Queen Consort Camilla occupy two very different spaces inside the British royal family. Camilla, now elevated to the title of Queen Consort following the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the coronation of King Charles III in May 2023, has spent the last 2 decades carefully rebuilding a public image that was once deeply damaged from the woman the British public blamed for the breakdown of Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage, to a queen consort now reportedly beloved by her husband, accepted by the palace establishment and increasingly celebrated in official royal circles. Princess Anne, on the other hand, has never needed to rebuild anything. She has simply always been there, consistent, unshakable, loyal to duty above all else. She completes more royal engagements than almost any other member of the family. She asks for nothing, she expects nothing to be given to her that she has not earned. But what she does not tolerate, according to those who know her closest, is the feeling that the traditions, the legacy and the structural integrity of the British monarchy are being quietly rearranged for personal convenience. That is precisely what insiders say happened when word reached Princess Anne that arrangements were being made for Camilla to use Buckingham Palace for a private summer stay, independently of the king's official schedule. What happened next surprised many observers. Rather than raise the matter in a family conversation or request a quiet discussion through official channels, Princess Anne reportedly authorized her legal team to move formally and swiftly. Letters were drafted, legal boundaries were outlined, and the message that came out of those letters was unmistakable: the use of Buckingham Palace, its private quarters and its residential spaces, falls under specific governance structures, and those structures do not allow for informal private use even by the Queen Consort without full institutional approval. The doors for that particular summer plan were sealed. To understand why this matters, you need to understand something fundamental about Buckingham Palace that most people overlook entirely. Buckingham Palace is not owned by the royal family. It is not a private home that can be passed down from parent to child, used for personal holidays or managed according to personal preference. Buckingham Palace is what is known as a Crown estate property, held in trust for the nation. It belongs in constitutional terms to the Crown itself, not to the King as an individual, not to his wife, not to his children or siblings, to the institution of the Crown as a whole. This distinction has been carefully maintained for generations. Queen Victoria understood it, King George V understood it, and Queen Elizabeth II, who spent her entire 70-year reign protecting the institution of the monarchy above all personal considerations, understood it most of all. Under Queen Elizabeth's rule, Buckingham Palace operated on a strict governance framework. Residential use of its private quarters was allocated based on official royal function, formal calendar duties and long-established protocols. It was never, under any circumstances, treated as a personal retreat to be used informally even by the most senior members of the family. And the reason for that is rooted in history. Centuries ago, the British monarchy nearly collapsed, not because of external enemies, but because of internal power struggles over royal property, royal access and royal privilege. The Wars of the Roses, the dissolution of the monasteries, the conflict between Parliament and the Crown. Time and again history proved that when the boundaries around royal property began to blur, the stability of the entire institution followed close behind. Queen Elizabeth II studied that history carefully. She structured Buckingham Palace's governance accordingly, and the people closest to her, the ones who truly absorbed her philosophy of monarchy, never forgot that lesson. Princess Anne is one of those people. And that is why when she sensed that those boundaries were beginning to blur once again she did not hesitate. But the story goes deeper than a legal letter about summer accommodation. What this conflict represents, at its core, is a much larger battle about the soul of the British monarchy, about what it stands for, and who gets to define it now that Queen Elizabeth II is no longer here to hold it all together. For decades Queen Elizabeth II was the gravitational center of the royal family. Everyone orbited around her values, her rules, her sense of duty. They were the invisible architecture that held the entire institution in place. When she died in September 2022, that architecture did not automatically transfer to King Charles III. Charles has his own vision of the monarchy, a more modern, slimmed-down, personally engaged monarchy. He has spent years working toward that vision, and Camilla has been central to it. What emerged in the months and years following the Queen's death, according to palace insiders and royal commentators, was a subtle but unmistakable shift in the culture of the palace. Decisions that once required formal approval began moving through informal channels. Access that once required institutional authorization began being arranged through personal relationships. The warm personal dynamic between Charles and Camilla began to quietly reshape how the palace operated day to day. For some members of the family this felt like a natural evolution. For Princess Anne it reportedly felt like something far more dangerous. Those close to Anne describe her as someone who carries the Queen's philosophy of monarchy inside her like a compass. She does not see the monarchy as a family business to be managed according to personal chemistry. She sees it as a constitutional institution with defined roles, defined boundaries, and defined responsibilities, none of which should ever be altered for personal comfort or convenience. At the heart of this conflict is something far bigger than one summer stay. It is the question of precedent, because in royal tradition precedent is everything. One informal use of palace space today quietly becomes the accepted norm. Tomorrow one relaxed boundary this year becomes the new standard the year after, and before long the carefully constructed governance framework that has protected the monarchy for centuries begins to quietly dissolve. Princess Anne reportedly saw that pattern beginning to form, and she moved to stop it. What happened next shocked observers both inside and outside palace circles. Rather than allowing the matter to pass quietly, as many senior royals might have done, Princess Anne reportedly authorized her legal representatives to formally communicate the constitutional and institutional constraints governing the private use of Buckingham Palace's residential quarters. The communication was precise, it was professional, and it was by all accounts completely watertight. Royal lawyers who later reviewed the matter reportedly confirmed that Anne's legal team had constructed their position on entirely solid ground. The Crown Estate governance frameworks clearly define what constitutes official residential use and what falls outside those boundaries. A private informal summer stay by the Queen Consort, scheduled outside of official royal duties and without formal institutional authorization, sat firmly in territory that the framework did not permit. This was not just about property, this was a declaration, a statement written in legal language that the traditions governing how the British monarchy operates do not bend to personal preference, regardless of how close that person sits to the throne. For Camilla's supporters inside the palace the move was reportedly shocking in its directness. Here was a senior member of the royal family, the king's own sister, using legal channels to formally block an arrangement that the king's wife had expected to proceed without compilation. For Princess Anne's supporters it was simply the correct thing to do. This decision sent a clear message throughout the royal household. It told every courtier, every private secretary, and every senior official that the governance frameworks established under Queen Elizabeth II were not going to be quietly dismantled simply because a new era had begun, that someone inside the family was watching, that someone was prepared to act. And that someone was Princess Anne. Royal commentators noted at the time that the move represented an extraordinary use of legal rather than personal channels to resolve a royal family dispute in a family where tradition normally demands that such matters be handled quietly through private conversations or through the king's private office. The decision to involve lawyers at all, let alone to allow their communications to become even partially known, was a significant escalation. It suggested that Princess Anne had already attempted and exhausted quieter means of raising her concerns. It suggested that the informal channels had failed. And it suggested that she was not willing to let the matter go. To understand the full weight of what this moment represents, you need to step back from the details of one summer stay and look at the much larger picture that is now coming into focus. The British monarchy is at a crossroads. King Charles III came to the throne later in life than any monarch in modern British history. He arrived with deeply personal views about what the monarchy should look like. More intimate, more environmentally conscious, more personally driven than the formal dutiful institution his mother presided over for 7 decades, and he arrived with a wife whose entire journey to the queen consort position was itself a story of transformation. From the most controversial figure in royal Britain to a woman increasingly embraced by the institution she once threatened to destabilize. But transformation, no matter how genuine, does not erase history, and it does not automatically transfer trust. Inside the royal family, the generation that grew up under Queen Elizabeth II carries a different set of values than the world Camilla represents. They watched their mother build an institution on sacrifice, restraint, and absolute adherence to duty over personal desire. They absorbed her warnings about the dangers of allowing personal comfort to bleed into institutional governance, and some of them, princess and most visibly, have carried those warnings as a responsibility rather than simply a memory. What the lawyer's letter revealed was that the traditionalist wing of the royal family has not simply stepped aside to make room for the Charles-Camilla vision of monarchy. It is still present, it is still watchful, and it is still fully capable of using every legitimate tool available to defend what it believes must be defended. For the long-term stability of the monarchy, this matters enormously, because a monarchy that appears divided, where the king's wife and the king's sister are operating within different understandings of the same institutional rules, does not project the image of unity that the crown has always depended upon to maintain public trust and political legitimacy. There is also a deeper question about the future of royal property governance. Particularly as the debate over the Crown Estate, its revenues, and its relationship to the royal family continues to evolve in British public and political life. Every informal use of palace space, every blurred boundary, every governance framework quietly set aside for personal convenience. These are not small matters in that context. They are precisely the kinds of issues that, if left unaddressed, become the ammunition that critics of the monarchy use to question whether the institution is still operating with the integrity it claims. Princess Anne clearly understood that, and she acted accordingly. So where does this leave the British royal family now? The answer in honest terms is that it leaves them at a moment of quiet but profound uncertainty. King Charles III is a man caught between two realities. On one side, his wife, a woman he has loved for most of his adult life, a woman he fought for, sacrificed for, and ultimately elevated to the highest position a consort can hold. On the other side, his sister, a woman who represents the most direct living connection to the values and philosophy of the institution their mother built, a woman who will never raise her voice, never seek the headlines, and never make a public scene, but who, when she decides something must be done, does it with absolute precision and complete resolve. For Charles, navigating between these two forces is perhaps the most delicate challenge of his reign, because unlike political opponents or public critics, these are not people he can simply manage from a distance. They are his family. They sit at his table, they stand beside him at ceremonies, and the tension between them, however carefully disguised in public, shapes the atmosphere inside every royal household, every private meeting, every shared royal engagement. What happened next in the months following the legal move is something royal insiders say is being watched very carefully. Whether Camilla and Anne have found a way to reach a private understanding, whether the king has stepped in to manage the situation, whether the legal boundaries outlined in that extraordinary communication have been quietly accepted as the new framework for managing palace access, none of this is publicly known. But the fact that it happened at all tells us something important about the state of the British monarchy today. It tells us that the transition from the Elizabethan era to the Caroline era is not simply a question of changing names on official documents. It is a deep, ongoing negotiation, fought sometimes in private conversation, sometimes in palace corridors, and sometimes evidently through the carefully chosen words of a royal lawyer. It tells us that Princess Anne, for all her quietness, for all her reputation as the most straightforward and uncomplicated member of the royal family, is one of the most consequential figures inside the monarchy today, not because she seeks influence but because she is one of the very few people within the institution who is not afraid to use it when she believes it is truly necessary. And it tells us that the future of the British monarchy will be shaped not only by the decisions of its king, but by the people who stand beside him, willing to remind him what it truly means to wear the crown. The question that lingers, the one that every royal watcher is quietly asking, is this. In a monarchy trying to find its footing between tradition and modernity, between the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and the personal vision of King Charles III, Whose compass is ultimately going to guide it? Is it possible for Camilla's warmer, more personal style of royalty to coexist peacefully with Anna's strict institution-first philosophy, or are we watching the early chapters of a much longer conflict, one that will define not just this reign but the future of the British monarchy for generations to come? We would love to know what you think. Do you believe Princess Anne was right to take this action to protect royal governance, or do you think Camilla deserved more flexibility as queen consort? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because in a story this layered every perspective matters. And if you found this documentary fascinating, please give this video a like. It truly helps this channel grow. Subscribe so you never miss a royal story, and share this with someone who loves the inside world of the British royal family. Because the palace doors may be sealed, but the story inside them is just beginning.